about case studies, and of course, you will not be experts in case studies after finishing this half an hour. But my purpose is really to try to introduce to you the method, because I think for many of you it's really new, and at least to kind of give you explanation of what you need to consider when you do your own case study, or which is also very important, what you need to pay attention when you're trying to read a paper that uses this method, and you can try to really evaluate and see if it's a study that is good in terms of quality. Yeah. And what we will be using today as examples is the papers that we gave you to read for this week. So if you had opportunity to have a look at them, that will make the process, I would say, smoother. If not, please consider still doing this after the lecture, because for us, this is really a way to explain the topic in a less abstract way. So case studies. First, of course, we start with defining or explaining what is strategy. This is a strategy that studies a contemporary or recent phenomenon, and it does not take it out of its real life context. So it needs to be really grounded in the context. Yeah. And very often these boundaries between the context and the study itself are quite blurry in reality. It often deals with situation when we have more variables that we want to study and measure than data points, which means essentially that it uses often qualitative data. And it almost always relies on multiple sources of evidence of data. And this is really actually a distinct characteristic of this strategy, because it's not always the case with other research methods. But what you really need to understand, that this is something that contemporary or recent and studied in the context. Eric already mentioned that qualitative, quantitative is essentially characteristics of data and not the study. And this is very true for case studies as well. It can use both types of data. Still, if you open books on qualitative methods, almost always you will see case studies there, because the primary association is that case studies mean qualitative data, because they're used to explore, describe, build theory. So that's why this type of data is predominant there. But you can really find plenty of studies that combine both types of data, and that only makes them more convincing and better, I would say. Yeah. Again, you cannot always say that I must exclude quantitative data because I'm doing case study. That's not correct. Case studies can answer different questions in research. What is happening if you want to describe something? How is something happening? Why is something happening? Yeah, if you're trying to explain and build theory. They are not very well, let's say, positioned or designed to answer questions that quantify relationships. So how many, how often is not very suitable question for case studies. These are more really for, let's say, quant analysis, so like surveys type of studies. But in principle, you can do so via case studies, but then you need really many cases to analyze that you can really create, let's say, reliable information in terms of this how many or how often answers. Yeah. Again, not the most common types of questions for case studies. Of course, you can also, while you're studying something in real life and the context, assume that there may be some causality between two concepts, between two constructs, but of course you cannot establish causality through a case study. Yeah, you can only do it through experiments, but you can kind of still identify that potentially it exists somewhere. In sum, it means that if you use case study as a research strategy, you can of course do exploration or description of new phenomena, you can build theory, or you can elaborate theory. You can, in principle, also do theory testing studies, but you cannot really use case study within decision science. Yeah, you can use some cases, and we will see it next week, but that's not the same as doing case study. For theory testing studies, maybe not all researchers would agree that case studies is possible, but essentially, if you can sample 30 plus cases, so you can have enough of data points for statistical analysis, it is possible. You don't really see it very often in research because the amount of work you need to do is really tremendous if you want to analyze these many cases in depth. And it's definitely not feasible for your bachelor project, yeah, because you simply have absolutely no time to study so many cases. Yeah. So if you, for your research, consider case study, it means that you're probably either doing exploration of a new phenomenal process, or you build theory or refine theory. Yeah. So this is where you can use case study yourself. Of course, no strategy is perfect. And the advantages is that you really have opportunity to deep dive into the context. Yeah. And it's very valuable in management research because it doesn't exist in vacuum. Yeah. So understanding not only what's happening, but what's around is really, really important. And case studies, because of the richness of data that you collect, allow you to do this. It can really enable you to learn about something very new or little known, even there is not much theory around. Yeah, because again, that's what the purpose of case studies potentially is. And that's not what many other strategies can do. Because of the richness, you can really uncover issues, links, connections between concepts that you cannot see using other methods. For example, if you do a survey, if you send out a questionnaire, you only get answers to the questions that you ask. Yeah, but you do not have opportunity to really notice or see what's there beyond the boundaries that you in advance thought about the topic. Yeah, so case studies, because of their richness, allow you to do this. Typically, results and findings are well received by the managers because they have this kind of inherent perception that, yeah, okay, it's studying the context, you really understood what's happening, then probably you give me a good recommendation as a researcher. And they're very versatile. Yeah, you can really have a lot of freedom in how you design your research while doing case study. There is no very strict protocol there. Of course, these advantages sometimes reflect in the disadvantages. So first of all, Eric already, I think, mentioned that results of qualitative research can be subjective. And again, if we talk about case study as a qualitative primarily, and not only, there's a lot of discretion of the researcher about which data to include and how to analyze it. Even if you use quantitative data, you still as a researcher have a lot of freedom to decide what type of data you want and how you, let's say, turn it in your case to analyze it. Yeah. So if you as a researcher have very strong values, points of view, opinions, it may work in such a way that you are really trying to prove your point versus trying to really find out what's the true situation. They're very time resource intensive because, again, they require a rich investigation, deep investigation, and it takes time. It takes more time, for example, than work on a survey. You cannot generalize very easily, yeah, because again, we do not typically have enough of data points to make statistically sound analysis. It's hard to study phenomena that's far in the past because you either cannot find enough information or you cannot find people to talk to, or people who are available probably would not remember what happened a long time ago. Yeah, so this is something that, again, limited to either relatively recent or contemporary things that are happening around us. And they're really difficult to write about, yeah, because all this richness that you discover needs to be somehow systemized and shortened and put in a text that makes a good story for the reader, but it's really not easy because there's a lot going on in any case study. Yeah, so these are things that really kind of maybe balance each other, but yeah, if you decide to do case study, you need to be, of course, mindful of these potential drawbacks and risks. Let's talk a bit about typology of case study, yeah, because what you hopefully also saw in the two papers that we gave you to read, that these are very different case studies. Yeah, they are made for different purpose and they are also different. One of them is a single case study and one of them is a multiple case study that compares 3 cases. Yeah, so single case study typically is chosen when you want to research something very unique. Yeah, something very extreme. And something that you really have a very good access to data, so you can really deep dive into this case. And also it really allows you to collect very rich data because you spend time only on one case, and it maximizes, let's say, the opportunity to study through one case the question that you are trying to investigate. It can be very powerful, but of course you cannot generalize from one case. Yeah, you cannot claim that something is always true if only one case is true. Yeah, but it's very powerful because it can really challenge the existing theory that says that something is always true if you find in your particular single case that no, that's actually not true. Yeah, so if For example, all previous cases would tell you that managers are motivated to work harder because of financial incentives, and you find one case that will tell you that no, people are motivated by simply thinking that, I'm doing right things, so it's intrinsic motivation rather than extrinsic financial. You can really challenge the existing theory. Yeah, it's a very basic example, but that's basically what single cases are potentially very good at. And they are typically associated with so-called longitudinal research. We'll talk about this in just a second. But basically, this type of research requires really more time than other types. So that's why typically there is only time to study one case. Multiple case studies, sometimes also they're called comparative case studies, depending on what you read. And typically you do use multiple case studies to compare them. Because you want to replicate what you study and what you want to enrich your data and findings. The ability to look into the same question in several cases is, of course, more convincing than studying a single case. So that's why generalizability is a bit better. But, of course, it adds complexity. Yeah? How do you select cases so that you can compare them? Do you want to have similar cases, different? Why? And of course, reporting of cases becomes then also more complex because there is more to write about than is just in a single case. Key question, of course, is how many cases? Yeah, do you need 2, 3, 4? The answer is the more the better, especially if you aim to test theory. Definitely you need many cases, but there is a balance between the depth and the number of cases. Yeah, because first of all, the time is a constraint. And second, there is probably not like unlimited access to cases that are comparable on them. Let's say constructs and concepts that you want to study and compare. Yeah, so there is a limitation in that. So this is basically the really basic between single and comparative case study difference. Yeah, here you can find some really, let's say in research, very famous single case studies if you want to look at how they can be written. They do not really relate to management research, but they are really very famous. Yeah, but I think we also have quite a good example in our course. One of the 2 papers that we gave you today, Abu Shaikh et al. It's a single case study. I think it's a very good representation of this strategy, and we will look into this example deeper today. To make it a bit more complicated, so now we said that we do have single and comparative case studies or multiple case studies, and any of this can also be either cross-sectional or longitudinal. So cross-sectional means that you are not really interested in the time component or dimension. You want to study something, but you do not want to study evolution over time or development over time. You're just interested in finding out how something works. Longitudinal is exactly the opposite. It's really about focusing on how something changed, how something developed, how something evolved. So these measurements and change over time is really key. Yeah, so this is something that you really need to understand because this is distinctly different approach than you need then to apply to case study. And as I said, both single case studies can be cross-sectional, longitudinal, or comparative case studies can also have either this or this nature. You cannot really combine them. You have to make a choice. And typically, single case studies are associated with longitudinal research because, again, single case studies take more time. And longitudinal studies also take more time. So it's really a better combination of studying something as it evolves from the past to the present. Yeah. More often, multiple case studies are cross-sectional. Again, probably there are exceptions, but again, the more studies, the more cases, the harder it is, let's say, to study them longitudinally because the more time you would need to do it. Again, the distinct difference between these 2 types is that you need multiple measurements over time to claim study is longitudinal. Second aspect of the typology is real-time, retrospective, or combination of both. So here, basically, you don't have to necessarily select if you're doing case study real time or you're looking something in the past. You can combine elements of the study in single or multiple case studies. I will explain a bit more what it means. You need to look at the time of data collection compared to the phenomenon that you are studying. If you are trying to study something that's happening as you collect data, then you can claim that your study is real time. If you're collecting data, but you're looking into something that happened in the past, compared to data collection point, then your study is retrospective. You can combine both if you want to really kind of look into the evolution from the past to the point where the data collection takes place. Yeah? Common mistakes here. So one is looking into the date of publishing, so like when the article is published, but not when data is collected. So you think, okay, article is published 2022, data collected 3 years ago, by default study is retrospective. No, date of publishing has nothing to do with this, yeah, but it's typically something that confuses students. Another thing that confuses students is data collection takes many months, so the case is longitudinal. No, data collection always takes months in any case study. It doesn't mean that the case is by default studying something over time, yeah? So it only can really you can really only compare this aspect between data collection time and when something is happening that you study. We'll look into this in just a second to analyze our articles for this week. Yeah, choice of the typology is always driven by your research question objective. Yeah, you cannot freely define this typology without looking into your objective and your question. So first your research question, first your research objective, and then you can find a suitable type of the study, and not vice versa. Yeah, so this is something that has quite strong link. And we will look in just a second in our week 3 papers, and then I think this will also answer Rob's question, and then we will also answer a couple more questions. Yeah. So I will go to Mentimeter, and I will also, this is the code that you can see again. Yeah, so which one is longitudinal? Which one studies something over time? So in which paper do you see time aspect and multiple measurements over time? Interesting. All right, so let's say that the majority of people thinks that the study about the refugee camp is not longitudinal. Yeah, so then I think it gives me a moment to think that we need to go a tiny bit back to really explain this again. Because if you read the article with attention, you would really clearly see that they say we collected data. I think they were collecting data for a couple of years when doing interviews. And they also said that they recreated the story of developing this camp, looking at the archival documentation, looking back from, I think, 2012 until the 2018. Yeah, so this is a clearly study that looked over economic activities in the camp over time. And this is a classic example of longitudinal study, yeah? Because they really look into what is happening from the time that they, I think, established the camp until the time when they were collecting data, because they were collecting data there real time and they were looking into the past. There is no time aspect in the second study, yeah, the study on the right, because they say we want to see how incentive drive behaviors of the suppliers, but they never mention that they do these measurements multiple times over time, or they look into how this incentive really changes supplier behavior over time. There is no time component in this study at all. Yeah. So this is really something that you maybe need to go back and look again. But there is important to understand the time aspect. You should really be able to recognize looking at data collection compared to phenomenon, what's happening when it's happening, when it's being studied. So please look again. Next question. Let's look into the second part of the typology. So the study about the refugee camps, yeah, is it retrospective, real time, or combination of both? And I think I kind of already gave out the answer if you listen to my explanation to the previous question. But yes, it's indeed combination of both, yeah, because first of all, they do interviews, observations, collect video materials, audio materials, studying camp development as they do data collection. And they also retrospectively, through study of archival documentation, recreate the story and the history of the camp starting from 2012, I believe. So yeah, this is combination of both, and such thing is possible. Yeah, because this is again something that you can do in one study. Here we are talking about a single case. Yeah, they indeed do this correctly. So yeah, those who say it's combination of both are right. Yeah. And then one more question, same about the other paper. Is it retrospective, is it real time, or is it combination of both? And this is maybe something that a bit more tricky, because simply the authors do not really, I think, give away any indication of time there at all. But I consider this study retrospective because they do not really stress that they're studying something as it's happening in front of their eyes. Yes, they do interviews. Yes, they study documents, but simply that they do interviews as they collect data does not make something that they study a real time. Yeah, they probably look at existing contracts and they look at how contracts change supplier behaviors. But they really, I think, focusing on this retrospectively. Again, this is something that this article doesn't give away, but by default, you can say that study is retrospective unless this aspect of time is very prominent. Yeah, and here it's really completely hidden in a way. Yeah, so they don't really discuss that they want to focus on really something that develops in front of their eyes. So by default, the study is then retrospective. Yeah, again, this is cross-sectional retrospective, a classic type of study. If you don't understand this, I do suggest that please mute yourself. Yeah. So this is something, if you still feel that you don't understand this, either do ask via discussion board or come to the Q&A session next week. We can discuss this again. Yeah, but this is something that is a retrospective study, and definitely not combination of both, because they don't really, again, stress the time factor there in general. Okay. But I'm happy about number of answers because it means that quite a few people read the paper. So level of analysis, another thing that I want to stress in the case studies. Level of analysis means at which level the study looks at research. Yeah, so your research objective or question, what actually it wants to study. And these are possible levels of analysis and management research. We probably can extend the list. You can study individual teams or departments if in organizations. You can study groups if they are customer groups in marketing. You can study by default organization, of course, or a company. Business units of organization, geographical divisions, dyads, like, for example, buyer-supplier dyads, network, or industry or country, multiple ways to look at different research questions. Many topics can be studied at different level. For example, study of learning to contract, which I think you have as a topic in Van Esten Puranam article, which is not for today, but they study how companies learn to contract. You can really look at how individuals develop their learning skills. You can ask the question about how spillover of knowledge happens between the teams, how organizations learn, how buyer-supplier dyads learn together. You can even probably look into how network of or supply chain learns together about something. Yeah. topics can be really studied, as I said, at multiple levels. Sometimes there is a certain preference for a level, but it's not really fully true. For example, marketing research often studies consumer behavior. So you often focus as a marketing researcher on individuals, or you maybe want to focus on behavior of certain customer groups. In supply chain, we very often look at organization, buyer, supplier, but also on dyads or networks of buying and supplying firms. Yeah. Again, it's not exclusive. You can also find other types of levels, but these are sometimes predominant in certain fields of research. One study can have multiple levels of analysis, yes, and then we talk about embedded design because one unit kind of sits inside the other. So, for example, you can study managers, but you also want to look how the organization functions in certain aspect towards them. Or you can say, I want to study organization, but I also want to compare how this works within a dyad of buyer and supplier. Yeah, so this can be more complex than just one level of analysis. Typical confusion. I'm interviewing individuals, so my level is individual. But that's not true because you typically either talk to a group of people if you're conducting group interview or focus group, or you talk to individuals. It doesn't define by default your level of analysis as individual or group. Yeah, you can study industry, but still you will talk to representatives of this industry. So you will still talk about something with individuals. Yeah, so this is something important to understand. Choice again is driven by your research objective and question. Yeah, and level of analysis, understanding of it, it's not only for case studies, it's for any type of research. You need to understand at which level I'm positioning my study because it's really, really important to understand of how you define your case or how you sample data without really understanding what I need to look at. Do I need multiple organizations? Do I just need multiple people in one company? Do I need to focus on different industries? You cannot really design your research if you don't understand the level. Yeah, and one more thing is unit of analysis. Yeah, this is really about which object is research. Yeah, so what researcher is focusing while looking at the cases. It's again very important to define because you need to understand what you need to measure, what you need to sample to study your question. And it's not the same as the level. You do find a lot this discussion blended into one in many books. I always prefer to split it because I think otherwise it becomes too confusing and complicated. Yeah, so unit is about what do I study, what do I measure. Level is at which level I want to study this. Yeah, so here I have example about strategies, but if you go back and look into for example, the study that we have for today, about the contracts and contracts incentive, you can say, okay, the unit of analysis is the contract because they're really sampling and looking into different types of contracts, how incentives are worded differently, but they study it at the level of supply organization. Yeah, because that's what they want to understand, how supplier organization responds to different types of contract, basically incentives. Yeah, so this is how it works. This is not quite the same. It may coincide. For example, if you are in marketing studying consumer behavior and you want something to know about opinions of consumers on, I don't know, certain types of coffee cups that you sell, then levels and units can coincide, but they don't have to coincide. And in many cases, they're really different. Yeah, so this is something that's important to know. I will not go into lots of depth here. I just want to show you, because we don't have time for discussion, I just want you to show the answers, let's say, which we try to also ask this question to prepare for this week, about how these two readings compare. Yeah, so if you look at the study about the refugee camp, it's a more complex study because they look at different levels. They studied at the individual level, of refugee level, they look into groups, they look into organizations like NGOs and how these interact. Yeah, so it's embedded design. It's a quite complex study. For the other paper, it's much simpler. They study organization, supply organization in particular, and they only do it at one level. Yeah, they are not trying to go up to the level of industry. They are not trying to go down to the level of managers. They want to know how supply organizations respond to different types of incentive provisions. And unit of analysis, basically, they do study economic activities in the refugee camp. And based on this, they build theory about the supply networks, because these activities form supply networks. And in the other study, they study contract, you can say, or you can say incentive provisions. Yeah. One last time, and then we will go for a break. Is that you do not really sample cases out of probability like you do, for example, with survey respondents. You need to find cases that give you information, or you think that they will give you information on the on what you want to study. For single cases, we said you pick a very unique extreme example. For multiple cases, you can either pick cases that are very similar or very different, or you can kind of combine aspects of similarity, dissimilarity, but that you need to really control for what needs to be similar and what can be dissimilar there. Yeah. So this is something that's actually quite often you see in the studies. But again, the idea here is that you do not go for any case that's there. You really need to find the ones that fit your needs for your research. And of course, within the case studies, you work with different types of data. First of all, you work with interviews. Yeah, I will talk about interviews in the second part in more detail, but interviews typically are the most common type of data collection method and data type in the case studies, often combined with archival documentation. Yeah, because in case studies, you want to use typically more than one type of data to ensure richness and to also ensure quality of data. Yeah, because sometimes you want to verify what is said in interviews is true if you look at documents, and vice versa. You can also use observations. Yeah, if you are a participant, for example, if you are doing internship in an organization, you can be really insider and look at what's going on. Or as researcher, you can, for example, ask for permission to be present in the meetings, and then you do your observations of how things work. Observations, for example, that's what was done in the study about the refugee camp. Yeah, not only interviews, but also observations. Then you are not talking to people, you are looking with your own eyes and making conclusions based on your own perception of what's going on. And finally, other types of data that you can think of, you can also use questionnaires within case studies. You can use any secondary video, photo, audio materials. You can also, of course, do focus groups. You can use any reports you can find. So case studies are about richness. So anything that you can find that is suitable for your study, that helps you to answer your questions, really goes into the study. Can you recognize, and then I promise you we'll have a break, one type of data here that cannot be used in retrospective studies? If yes, can you put the answer in the chat? What you can only do with real-time studies? Observations, indeed. Yeah, good. Because you can only observe something that's happening in real time. Very good. Yeah, correct. Everything else, you can really look into the past. Very good. That's all that we want to know about the case studies. I suggest we come back 11. Yeah, so 11:05. And then we will discuss interviews, yeah, in relation to case studies, but also more broadly as a strategy. Time for a break.